Cheryl, would you like to introduce our special guest?
I'd like to welcome Ellen Anderson. Thank you for coming. I think there's probably no one in the state that knows climate policy better than you, Ellen. Ellen served for, is it 18 years in the state Senate? And she ran the PUC. She headed up the Energy Environmental Lab, or the Energy Transition Lab at the U of M. She was an Energy and Environmental Advisor for Governor Dayton. Now she's the Climate Program Director for the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, who often is the attorneys behind fighting for climate, fighting against the mining. And Ellen's originally from New Jersey, and she came here to go to Carleton and never left. And if I missed anything, please add it. But thank you for joining us tonight. I know you have a huge passion on everything about you is climate.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I appreciate that kind introduction. And yes, that is my passion, is climate. And that's a big reason why I moved on from the University of Minnesota and joined the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy just about a year ago. And just for information, we call it MCEA. And it's been working for almost 50 years now to protect Minnesota's environment using law, science, and public policy. And you know, it's an advocacy organization. And so I am delighted to be part of this organization where we can really go all in on climate. And as climate program director, that's my job. So I'm excited to be there. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things that we're doing as we get through this program. So thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you all for being part of this great organization that is doing so much to advocate, educate, and, you know, impact climate change. It's so important. And I guess I'll say one more thing. It sounds like from what I heard in the opening chats that y'all are from all across Minnesota, more or less, or different people from different parts, some from northern Minnesota, some from the cities. Pretty spread out, which is great. Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to get started. I'm a little wonky. I have a lot of slides and information, which I hope you find interesting. We started really this last few months, just really putting out our view of Minnesota and how we're doing on climate. And we developed this report card, and that's part of what I want to share with you tonight. So I'm just going to jump into the slides. I will share, hang on a second, and in just a minute I'll share my screen. Let's just jump into the topics, and I'll try to not be too wordy because I want to make sure we have time for discussion and questions, but I do have a lot of content to share with you tonight, so I hope it's helpful. So first, what we know, okay, let's have these slides go forward. Okay, I have to move my cursor, got it. So what we know is climate change is happening right now, right here, and everywhere else, but in particular, it's happening here right now. And for those from Duluth, you'll recognize, of course, that photo on the northeastern side of the screen from the Duluth flood a few years back that was so dramatic. And we know that Minnesota is one of the fastest warming states. We know that ecosystems are already being disrupted, and that affects wildlife, it affects wild rice, it affects farming, it affects, you know, our flora and our fauna. And, you know, and it's bringing on storms, air pollution, heat waves in other parts of the country, extreme forest fires, wildfires. And of course, we found out this week that extreme heat is only just, you know, it's right now, it's happening right now. And to the extent that schools had to close early because of it. And it's kind of unprecedented. We're breaking records left and right. And, you know, climate change, as you know, beyond what I've mentioned about what's happening in Minnesota primarily, we know that there's a lot of science out there that shows us there's some worst case scenarios about climate, and we need to be aware of those because that's what we have to work even harder to prevent some of these gigantic, horrible outcomes like mass extinction of so many species, acidified oceans, which is already happening, of course, and how it's being considered as a threat multiplier, climate change is, because it intersects with so many things around the world, such as refugees and migration and, you know, political instability is all intersected when you have severe climate problems and threats. So we have a lot of things to worry about, and you know that already. So hopefully I'm going to end up giving you some things to feel positive and hopeful about. So I want to next talk about, you know, what has Minnesota been doing about this? And as Cheryl mentioned, I spent a lot of time in the legislature passing a lot of laws, and so I want to talk a little bit about some of that history of what we've tried to do in Minnesota to make progress on climate change. So the Next Generation Energy Act was passed in 2007. It was nearly unanimous and it was completely bipartisan. We had a moment in time where we came together on a bipartisan basis. You can see in this photo, Governor Pawlenty, who is a Republican, is signing this bill, the Renewable Energy Standard. And there, a very young version of me is standing there looking really happy. And he gave me the pen after he signed it. And there was a mix of Democrats and Republicans there together to celebrate this event. So what I learned from that is, even though it's really hard to overcome that partisan political divide on climate, we've seen it done, and so that means I know it can happen again. So this is about the Next Generation Energy Act is our main tool in Minnesota policy that is designed to affect climate change and, you know, increase clean energy. So I'll just go through that. So the Renewable Energy Standard was part of the bill, and this is the one that I specifically had authored. It took 6 years to pass it to get to that consensus. And it required 25% of our electricity, at least, to come from renewable sources like wind and solar. And there were a lot of skeptics for many years. Back in 2001, 2002, most experts who came to the Capitol and testified about renewable energy and our, you know, standard that said 25%, they said, you know, the highest amount of renewable energy we could ever have on the grid reliably is 1% or 2%. So we have come so far since then because we met our 25% target 7 years ahead of schedule. We passed it in 2007. It was required to be done by 2025. It happened in 2017 or 18? 17, I believe. The Next Generation Energy Act also included energy efficiency requirements that Minnesota's utilities had to implement under the Conservation Improvement Program, and that's still in place. And there's even a chance that the legislature will increase those requirements a little bit this session if the ECO Act actually becomes law. And then there were limitations on coal plants, although lots and lots of exemptions, like for all existing efforts to build new ones. And then the other part of the Next Generation Energy Act that really is important to climate is the greenhouse gas emissions targets. So the goal was to reduce statewide greenhouse gas emissions by these targets: 15% by 2015, 30% by 2025, and 80% by 2050. And so when it says statewide, that means all sectors. That means not just electricity. It means transportation, agriculture, industry, you know, and waste and other products, you know, buildings and other parts of our economy. We're supposed to meet these targets. So how are we doing? Not so well. The Pollution Control Agency is required as part of the Next Generation Energy Act to submit a report every 2 years, the greenhouse gas emissions report, and submit it to the legislature, and it's publicly available on their website. to look at how we're doing on these targets. And it goes into some detail, and you can really dig in. If you go to their website and look at this report, you can dig in more to each sector and how each one is doing and why. But what you can see from this slide is that up here in blue, dark blue, that's how much emissions we've reduced, excuse me. In the most recent report, which came out in 2021, and it's based on data, there's a data lag, so it's a few years old. This is how much reduction in emissions we've gotten, which is not very much. The electricity sector is doing pretty well at reducing emissions, and that is in large part because of that renewable energy standard that really pushed us to expand renewable energy and renewable electricity. But most of the sectors are actually going upward. So totally contrary to the intention of this law. And you can see here the green bar shows where we're supposed to be. And in 2015, we just blew past that target, didn't meet it. The next target that's coming up is 2025. And, you know, this is a wake-up call. And we're going to miss the 2025 target the way things are going, unless some dramatic change is made. So that is the big challenge that we face. We have a Next Generation Energy Act that has really good targets, but it's not being implemented. And one more thing I'll say is that the last target, the 2050 goal of 80% reduction by 2050, at the time we passed that in 2007, that was based on the guidance of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the world's preeminent scientists, as part of the UNFCCC that Cheryl mentioned before, the climate, the UN global climate work. This is the scientists are part of that, and they're peer-reviewed scientific experts from around the world, and they had said at that time in 2007 that in order to keep to limit the worst impacts of climate change by the end of the century, and they were looking at a 2 degrees Celsius increase at that time, that would require an 80% reduction by 2050. And so we use that as our upper target based on the IPCC science. So that was a good thing that it was science-based. So now the science has evolved. And so, oh, it's so great to hear the sound of thunder. Maybe we'll get some rain. So in 2018, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and all those scientists came out with a new report that said, well, we really should be targeting 1.5 degrees, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. And they looked at the science related to that and came up with more aggressive targets that are needed to meet that globally, to the reduction of carbon dioxide that we need. And so this report warned that we need to cut global emissions roughly in half by 2030. And I'm sure all of you heard about this when it came out. Basically we have a decade to cut emissions in half. We need to reach net zero by 2050. 80% is nowhere near good enough. So those are the challenges that we face. And according to this, we need to virtually eliminate fossil fuels in the next 30 years. And we certainly need to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure. So let's see. So how do we, what do we do about this? How do we tackle this? And I'll talk some more about what's wrong with our current law and why it's not working, but we'll get to that. So let's go to the next slide. So how do we get to decarbonized grid? Sorry, that's kind of covering it up. At least it is on my screen. So first, we need to decarbonize the electric grid. And so as I mentioned, the electricity system is doing really well, and it's actually reducing carbon emissions rapidly. We're still not there yet. We're not 100% or even 80% renewable and clean electricity, but we're on that path to get there. And And so most experts say if we can have a super clean grid, whether it's 80%, 90%, or 100% clean energy without any carbon emissions coming out of it, and then we electrify many other sectors. We electrify everything. Then we can use that clean, renewable electricity to power transportation and vehicles, to heat and cool buildings, to do much of heavy industry with electrical motors. And that is, and plus improving efficiency. Those are kind of like the three, the holy grail. Those three main strategies, many experts say, are the most important things that we need to do to improve, to really make it possible to get towards our targets. And as I mentioned before, of course, we have to shift long-term investments away from fossil fuels into clean energy. So, okay. Oh, sorry. I need to follow my slides and not talk until I see what they say. The other piece that we need desperately is to have climate justice and equity built into what we are doing when it comes to the clean energy or decarbonization, to have it be a just climate transition. That's essential. And we know so much more now than we did about why. There's so much more awareness because of our last year of really amplifying issues of racial justice. And I had the pleasure this morning of listening to a talk by Cecilia Martinez. Does anyone know who she is? I guess I can't see all of you, but she is a rock star. And I met her because she used to work in Minnesota, and she had an organization called SEED, Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy. And she's a former college professor with a PhD, expert in climate and energy work and policy. And she came and did some work with us at the U of M, which was quite an honor. And now she just got appointed by President Biden to be in charge of climate equity as part of the CEQ, I always forget the name, what that stands for, the Council on Environmental Quality. Thank you. Sorry to be slow on that. The CEQ, which is a really important part of the executive branch of the president's cabinet. And she is now in charge of environmental justice. And she spoke at an event this morning where REAMP, I don't know how many of you participate in REAMP. It's a really fantastic regional organization or a coalition of many other clean energy and climate justice organizations. Anyway, she spoke at their online event today, and I was frantically taking notes, and I have taken some of her thoughts and included them here. And some of the ideas that I know we need to do is to stop sacrifice zones. And I was really happy to hear that. I saw that on your website, that is an issue that you had posted on your website, that sacrifice zones are real, and there's just so much history of exclusion in where people's property can be, where they can live. And then the exclusion to certain areas has coincided with the, putting in the worst polluting kinds of infrastructure, or paving over neighborhoods to create highways, et cetera. So that communities of color and low-income communities have been oftentimes resigned to be living in locations where they have just a disproportionate burden of pollution and climate impacts as well. And that's what we call sacrifice zones. That's what they are. Like, the majority community doesn't have to live with these smokestacks or these coal plants right next door, but they accept that others will host those facilities from which the rest of us can benefit from some of the outcomes. And we need to embed equity and justice into all governmental agencies. This is some of the things that Cecilia was talking about. We need to hold government accountable using clear metrics and evaluations on how they're doing. And apparently in the Biden administration, this is underway right now. Every agency is required to implement their climate equity plan, and they have to have metrics to measure it, and they will all be evaluated and have to do scorecards. So that is really, really exciting. And we have to hear the voices of those left behind or facing disproportionate impacts. Another thing that Cecilia said that was near and dear to my heart was to start with concrete solutions that can benefit multiple sectors and communities. And to me, some of those ideas, are concrete ideas I really like. What if, utilities had to pay for rooftop solar for all customers that wanted them? What if utilities had to put air source heat pumps in everybody's home that wanted them so that they can move to electrification and avoid using fossil fuels and combusting that in their homes? Anyway, so that's an exciting concept for me, and there's a lot of work that we need to do here. So next thing that I'm going to get to, okay, is the report card. So how are we doing? So Minnesota's electricity sector, we gave that a B. It's actually, the emissions are down 29% in the electricity sector since 2005 levels, which is excellent. As I mentioned, it's by far the best of all the sectors in Minnesota's economy. And that this is, most of these trends are true nationwide. But the reason it's a B, okay, first the good news. They're closing coal plants. And, many, many coal plants have been retired. In Minnesota, we only have a few left that are operating, and they all have retirement dates proposed for them. So we're on the path towards getting rid of coal in Minnesota and in many other parts of the country. We're building tons of renewables, wind, solar, and using batteries. The prices have come down dramatically. And so our utilities that were skeptical 20 years ago that they could do a lot of renewable energy are now going in big because they see it as the lowest cost alternative. And they understand now how to manage these kinds of resources that are spread across the land instead of one big giant power plant. And spurred by our policies that really help make that happen. But the problem is that utilities around the whole United States of America are on a natural gas, fossil gas binge. And every time they say we were going to retire a coal plant, they want to build a new gas plant. And even Xcel Energy that, put it was the first utility in the country to announce it was going to go to 100% carbon free. And they're proposing a new gas plant, and they're fighting hard for that in the current integrated resource plan. I could go into each of these topics in great detail, but I don't want to spend too much time because maybe we should save that for questions. If people want to hear about the integrated resource plan and how that could affect the natural gas plants, I'd be happy to talk about that maybe in the Q&A. And I talked about that last night at this other program, so some of you may have heard that. So this is a problem. We can't do new gas plants. They're going to be around for 40, 50 years, and they're going to pollute. And it just is contrary to everything we know about climate science. So that is why they're only getting that grade. The next sector, carbon-free electric grid. When are we going to get there? So here's some pledges that utilities have made. Xcel and Minnesota Power, two of our biggest utilities, pledge net zero by 2050, but they both are planning new gas plants. Okay, I guess I covered that. So action needed. So policy, we could talk a lot about policy as well. And we were very engaged at the state legislature this legislative session, and we proposed our own legislation, which I want to talk about a little bit. The 100% bill is an excellent proposal that the governor supports, state agencies support, many grassroots organizations support. There's 100% clean energy bill that passed the House of Representatives. Unfortunately, it sort of died immediately in the Minnesota Senate, so we have a problem there. And there's the federal clean energy standard, which Senator Smith is an author of, to get a national clean energy standard, which would really do amazing progress. Okay, transportation. Let me try to go through this a little more quickly. Transportation, the fastest or the highest emitting sector right now in Minnesota and also nationwide. It's exceeded electricity now. So it gets a very poor grade because basically emissions are going up. It's our largest source. We need more electric vehicles, and we need access to electric vehicles so that people have incentives to be able to afford to purchase one when their car needs to be replaced. We did pass there was a rulemaking based on the governor's executive order to put a rule in place for a clean car standard, which is patterned after California, but many other states have done it as well. And basically what it is going to require is that the auto manufacturers have to send us Minnesotans more types of electric vehicles to choose from, and they have to have more types of, low emissions and zero emissions vehicles available in Minnesota. And there's so many electric vehicles out there in the world that we cannot buy here. Do you want an electric pickup? Do you want an SUV? Do you want a variety of different options? You have to go somewhere far away to get that. And we need the charging infrastructure. So that's just electric vehicles. There's lots more we can do on transportation that matters, and these are just a couple examples. Rail expansion, reduce vehicle miles traveled. And I love this. When I saw this map, apparently the Biden administration asked Amtrak, the national organization Amtrak, to come up with a plan for if there was money in the infrastructure bill, where would they expand or improve service? And apparently Amtrak was giddy at the opportunity and came up with this map. And wouldn't it be awesome if we could again take a train from the Twin Cities to Duluth, or from the Twin Cities to, I think it's Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Just lots and lots of connections that are not possible right now. That would encourage people to want to take trains. So buildings, not doing well either. Their emissions are also going up. Commercial buildings up 15%, residential 32%. And we know 90% of Minnesotans use natural gas to heat their homes or for their hot water, their stoves, et cetera, et cetera. And that is not sustainable. Again, we have the highest portion of electricity in the US is now from natural gas. So natural gas being used to produce electricity and being used for heating and industrial uses. So it's kind of, we have way more than we can afford to have. So heat pumps and electric appliances, we could talk about that if you like. Better insulated structures. There's so many old leaky homes that people could use help fixing up. Agriculture, again, it's about tied with transportation in the emissions increase, or in the amount of emissions emitted from that sector. So it's not good, and it's very difficult to change because agriculture is so lightly regulated. And it comes from methane, primarily from methane from livestock, nitrous oxide from fertilizers. So we need farmers to adopt a lot of best management practices, which can make a big difference on carbon impacts and protect the soil health and the water quality. Industry, also, emissions are going up. So this is heavy industry. Some examples here. We have to help these companies transition to cleaner sources, which ultimately would probably save them a lot of money because they could be more efficient. I'm a big believer that, and it's kind of interesting, it's kind of President Biden's approach is just put a bunch of money out there to make the right thing happen, because it works. If you can help whatever sectors you want to do the right thing and to decarbonize, let's just give them the incentives to do it. It's good for all of us. And just think about the cost of climate change and the cost of human health. So I think that would be a really good use of public funds. All right, let's see. So what can we do about it? There's lots of, obviously, demands for action. That's what you guys are all about, you're involved in, and that's fantastic and important to use your voices. And, you know, I think I always look at polling data and, you know, it's not perfect, but it gives you really good indications. The Yale climate tracker lets you know about how public opinion in the United States is shifting over time on climate. And in our last election, it was very clear that that election was strongly about climate for a large number of voters, and not just Democrats, but people of different parties. And so, but we still have a lot of work to do to make it bipartisan. I mentioned the House of Representatives. They put together a fantastic omnibus climate bill with lots of great provisions in it. So I want to mention a few of these policies, and then I'm going to wrap up on my slides soon. I don't want to talk you to death. So we at MCEA, especially, well, it was really me because I was an architect of this Next Generation Energy Act. And I've been frustrated since 2007 that we've never been able to have teeth into that law to require it to be implemented the way it's supposed to. So I drafted legislation, and I worked very closely with the Minnesota House Climate Caucus, which is a number of House members, and it's chaired by Representative Patty Acom. And so I worked hand in hand with her on this legislation, and we drafted a bill that really would update the Next Generation Energy Act, and we called it the Next Generation Climate Act. And in it, we put the new IPCC target, so it would be a 45% reduction across the economy by 2030, and then net zero by 2050. It would include equity provisions to ensure that frontline communities are not harmed, and that benefits of clean energy transition are available and accessible to all. And also that, you know, maybe the most critical part of the bill was that government would be required to do this. Government agencies would have to embed these climate targets into all of their activities. So that means permitting, that means funding, lots of other activities that governments do now, and they are not required to consider climate, or if they are, they're not required to consider the climate goals that are Minnesota's targets. So again, this bill passed the House of Representatives, which I was very happy about, but it never got a hearing in the Senate. On the electricity side, we had some great bills. Carbon-free grid by 2040. That's part of the governor's bill I mentioned, the clean energy bill. It also included 55% renewables. So that would take that renewable energy standard and ramp it up for just renewables. Some really great legislation to advance electric vehicles, including school buses. And this was a very ambitious proposal, which was also part of the governor's proposal for new commercial buildings to be net zero by 2036, and existing commercial and residential buildings to have emit 50% fewer amounts of energy emissions by 2035, which is quite ambitious, and that would require a lot of government intervention to help support people and building owners to do that. So also President Biden's plan is very ambitious, and that gives me hope. And it's even more aggressive than what we have in Minnesota and what we proposed. So carbon-free electricity by 2035, net zero by 2050, all this investment in infrastructure like the power grid, which is, you know, woefully uninvested in and under, it's just not up to speed where it needs to be able to be reliable across the country. And it's also, there's huge log jams in building transmission or improving transmission lines, which are essential for carrying renewable energy across the lines, because oftentimes wind projects and solar projects are, you know, located farther away from where most of the population is. So they need transmission to carry that. lots of funding for all of these aspects. So just real quickly to end on, and these are many things you may already know, you could thank the House for this really great bill, which unfortunately the Senate has not agreed to or even given a hearing to any of the bills I mentioned on the page prior, except for solar in schools. That's the only thing that the Senate has accepted. But we'll see what happens when they have their special session. On the integrated resource plans, that's something to track. And we can, as I said, we can talk about that more in detail. In those of you in Duluth, they passed a really ambitious climate emergency resolution in the Duluth City Council, and now, local work to put together a plan. But now, now the rubber hits the road is making it happen. And then you all know there's lots of great organizations that are working in this space. I'd be happy to share these slides later if this is of any interest to you. And then the last thing I'll say is just a few examples of things you can do. And I'm sure this is the kind of thing those of you who study climate all the time are aware of. But it's good advice. Reduce your carbon footprint. When you're replacing a car or appliance, try to go electric. Having solar panels is a bit of a luxury for most people, but you can often join a community solar project. Improve home insulation, walk, bike, take the bus, carpool, eat less red meat, compost your food waste, and divest from fossil fuels. I think that's my final comment. So I'm going to stop sharing and stop talking and turn it over to you all.
I'm just going to ask anyone who wants to ask a verbal question to use the raise hand in the reactions menu, so that, because that will move you to the first screen no matter where you are. It's better than waving your hand. And just, you can start. And Ellen, if you want to look in the chat at the questions that are there while we're getting started.
Yeah, let's start with those. That would be great. And I'm just looking at Adway's question. Why is recycling and organics recycling always at the bottom of the list when discussing environmental justice? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know why it is. Because you're right, it's something everybody can do in their homes, and you don't have to have, fancy equipment. I think, I don't know why it's on the bottom of the list. If that's your experience, I'm very curious to know more about that.
Well, because you didn't even mention it in your presentation at all.
Just at the very end, like, here's what you can do is organics, composting, that's it. So, and waste I mentioned just as one sector, but it's not part of our report card. So you're spot on that it was not a highlight of my presentation, and you make a really good point that it needs to be a higher priority.
Okay, before we go on to another one in the chat, Mark, you had your hand up?
Yeah, let me unmute here. Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Good content. I have a question for you. You have experience on Senate and the PUC. I just got a mailer, I believe it was from Excel, suggesting that I replace my high efficiency electric clothes dryer with a gas dryer. And we're on their wind source program, and we also have solar panels, so we have pretty clean electricity already. How do we incent Excel to stop sending suggestions that we use more fracked gas and that we electrify our lives and say promote cold climate air source heat pumps instead of fracked gas dryers?
Yeah, absolutely. I just did a home energy audit again. I haven't done one in like 25 years on my old house. And I was just shocked when I saw that it looked like there's rebates for replacing my old water heater with a gas one, but not for electric. And I'm looking for incentives for heat pumps as well. And I don't know if they have those. And the problem with Excel, of course, is that they are both an electricity and a gas utility. And so there needs to be, we need to take really, strong policy action to get them to wean them off of their gas future. But that's going to take, probably legislation. It's going to take the Public Utilities Commission. It's going to take a huge amount of grassroots pressure to do that. But I think you're absolutely right. They're fixated on gas, and of course CenterPoint is as well. And we need to just stop there and help people switch away from gas and new homes. I believe there's efforts in other states to require that new home buildings can't have new gas hookups to them, but that has not been. I think the Minnesota Senate authored legislation that would have, banned that from happening in Minnesota. I don't think it went anywhere, but no, very good point.
Yeah, good, thank you.
And I'm also, the climate action plan you're referring to in this other question, is that the Governor Walz's plan you're talking about?
I believe so. And it was presented by Hennepin County.
Uh-huh.
And they had us go through it and asked us what we thought about it. And nobody ever listens to me, but it looks pretty, but it looks like fluff to me. So
yeah,
it does.
I haven't looked at Hennepin counties if they have their own plan. I know they're doing a plan, but the fact is, Governor Walz and his has a climate cabinet and a climate advisory council, and agencies that are designated to do climate work. And they put out a report in late December, and it's not a plan. We don't have a plan. We do not have a plan. We have a lot of, in state government right now, we have a lot of some nice provisions, some nice policy ideas, but they're mostly incremental, and there's just no comprehensive plan on how we're actually going to get there. And I think that's a huge challenge here that we have to overcome.
There's one in the chat from Lincoln. Lincoln, do you want to say it out loud, or do you want me to read it?
Sure, I'll talk about it. Thank you. Well,
okay.
I'm always absolutely blown away that Excel, for example, and they're proposing a gas plant in their IRC. Is that what it is?
Integrated
IRP.
Resource Plan,
Yeah,
IRP.
IRP. Yeah, and I is it still open for comment, by the way?
I mean, there's still public comments get posted every day.
Okay.
We're supposed to all submit reply comments by June 25th. So in a few weeks, there'll be a lot more information about how things are looking.
Well, anyway, I encourage people to comment on it and push back on it. But nonetheless, the thing that seems so crazy is that it has been proven again and again that renewable energy, generates far more jobs and grows the economy, and they make a hell of a lot more money than sticking with old ways. And I don't understand that. What's the matter with these people?
Well, I would say utilities, they have incentives to build investor-owned utilities. I guess I should say Brick was talking about co-ops, in that they actually are more positive towards electrification, and they see it as like, this is an opportunity. We could sell more electricity. And but most of the big investor-owned utilities, they have, the more big infrastructure they build and they own, the more return that their shareholders get. And so they have tended, especially when we're talking about distributed energy, where you could get rooftop solar, you could get community-based.
You get down. I'm sorry.
Community-based projects. That is, they don't think they're going to make any money from that. So that's been an area of resistance among utilities.
Okay. Well,
and there's also just kind of a, there's this feeling that we can't do it, that it's not really, there's still people within the utilities who believe renewable energy isn't reliable. It's not, you can't count on it. It's not going to provide what we need. And, everybody says, Texas, look what happened in Texas. But the fact is that, when they had the polar vortex, we did just fine. And part of it is because we are part of a big national grid called MISO. And that goes all the way from Manitoba all the way down to New Orleans. And so all these different states share their electricity resources. And so pretty much anywhere there's going to be some resource available, even as you get more and more renewables.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody, we are at about 28 minutes after 7, and we're scheduled for 7:30. Ellen, can you stay on a little longer to answer a few more questions if anyone has any? And if anyone has to leave, we understand. Ellen, if you have to leave, we understand. But okay, anybody else have a question?
Well, I see a couple more unanswered things I might just say really fast. So about the HERC, the big incinerator in Minneapolis, there was work in the Minnesota House this session, led by, I believe, Representative Fu Lee, and Representative Hornstein, to take it since. For a lot of years, incinerators, garbage burners have been considered renewable energy under Minnesota law, which is a big flaw in the law. And they did take the HERC off of that as at least a starting point. So that's good. Of course, the Senate did not agree to that. But so we still have to have, the elections really matter a lot in what we are going to be able to do at the legislature. Somebody asked, no, there's no penalties about not enforcing this law, and that's why we introduced this legislation that would require them to do it, and that we could sue them if they didn't do it under the Minnesota Environmental Rights Act, which is something that my organization is very familiar with. There's a lot of other. Yes, please go ahead.
What would be the best thing we can do to try to get Walls to get a plan?
That's a good question. I think they probably think they have a plan, but I'm kind of working on a project now that would basically put together, like, here's what it would take. Here's what the plan should be. Here's what a plan could be. Here's the things that we could do to actually reach these targets. And I'd love to hear people's ideas about that, because I think we need to be really creative. What to do about it? Man, that's a good question. I mean, I think Governor Walz he had so much pushback based on doing this clean car rule that the Senate legislators have threatened to shut down government, including the state parks, and to remove all environmental spending from this year's session if they keep that clean cars going forward. So it's been kind of, perhaps made him a little gun shy. I don't know, but that's not a good enough reason, and then he'll be up for re-election probably in a year. And, what is he going to want to be more bold running for re-election or less bold? My guess is a lot of politicians are less bold when they're running for re-election. So that's a big problem. I don't know what the answer to that is, except using our influence. I mean, we could start a campaign to say, we need a real climate plan.
Yeah. Well, we could write letters. Who would we direct them to, our representative or to the governor?
I'd say both is important.
Okay.
Both is really important.
Okay, there's another question. There's two more questions. One of them is from a person who's got my name stuck on his picture. I don't know why. A gentleman in the pink shirt, but he's not Carol Arney. Would you tell us who you are and ask your question?
Sure, I'm Lee Schaefer. I don't know how I became.
Oh, Lee.
So what's your identity?
Oh, I know, because I sent you my link. That's what happened. Because you couldn't get a link, and I sent you my link. Okay, that explains it. Anyway,
in any case, my question is, what about nuclear energy? I know Bill Gates was pretty high on some of the new technology related to nuclear power and the hope that that might help solve some of the issues with when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say back in the early 90s, when I was first in the legislature, I was one of the biggest opponents of nuclear power at the time, because it's so, it has so many dangerous side effects from the nuclear waste. And, we also had, the experience of some, disasters. But a lot of environmentalists have kind of evolved on that a bit, and I think I'm one of them. Like, for example, with Excel in their integrated resource plan, they want, we want them to shut down their coal plants. We want them to not do a new gas plant. And so in order to reach kind of a compromise or to reach sort of a balance, I think continuing the nuclear plants is an important part of that. I can support that as part of their profile or portfolio. And, the 100% clean energy bill that has been a really grassroots organizing effort this year, they support the 100% bill that includes nuclear in it. And that's part of the governor's proposal as well. So I think that's a big change for a lot of people and hard to swallow for many. And I think there's also, a lot of concern. Prairie Island has really, in particular, gotten, I want to say kind of an impolite word. They've really been treated badly in this whole nuclear history, as have many tribal areas and communities. And so I would think that the tribe would need to make that decision themselves rather than letting XL or legislators make that decision about their plant. But right now it's the Monticello one that's being considered. Nobody's proposing any new technology of nuclear right now in Minnesota. So that's another whole discussion.
Okay, let's see. Is there anyone
I have a
else
question, Carol.
Sure. Go ahead.
I finally got back on the connection here. Ellen, I was curious, is there any discussion at the state level about reinstating some of the Obama era policies about increasing fuel emission or fuel mileage for vehicles, passenger vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, that's underway at the federal level right now. And so I think that's what we're relying on. I didn't see any specific bills to do that at the state level, because I think it's something that's, it may be preempted by federal law. Like you might have to,
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I haven't seen that as a local thing. And sorry, that's all I know. And it's a good question. But I think President Biden is pushing that really hard to reinstate those requirements that.
Yeah, I bring that up as I got cut out when I was indicating about how we need to just reduce our use of energy and, across all sectors, whether it's gas, electric, and other areas. If we can reduce the emissions from whatever source we're using, it's going to be a help, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I really like this comment. My neighborhood has our own climate action plan. That's a great idea and something it would be great to see that all over Minnesota. Any other last?
My hand is raised, and it's been raised for a long time.
Oh, so. I'm sorry, it isn't showing on the screen for some reason. So go ahead.
Okay, so on the Hennepin County Action Plan, and on your presentation as well, all of those things are on the macro level, not the micro level. And we keep talking about zero emissions, but we're never going to get to zero emissions until we start recycling the organics, recycling, and thinking about what's going into the landfills. And so we have to work together to make that happen. And I don't know how to do it, because every time I bring it up, no matter what meeting I'm in, and I bring it up about that, it always gets bypassed. And so I don't know what needs to be done about that, but we have to do that. And then there was an article that came out about old landfills where chemicals were seeping into our drinking water. And so if that's happening in old landfills, then that's happening in new landfills, because we know that organics and the chemicals and things, how things work together, that makes methane gas and things that affects climate change and all of these things is still affecting us. So we'll never get to zero emissions without talking about recycling and organic recycling. And again, that's on the micro level, what everybody can do it. So how is it that it continues to get bypassed? And who do I need to talk to? Because I'm tired of every time I go to a meeting, it gets overlooked. So who can I talk to make this happen? Because I'm pretty sure you all, because you care about the environment, just like that's why we're here, right? And we care about climate change, but you cannot combat climate change if we continue to put trash and recycle all waste in landfills. It's not going to happen.
Well, I suspect you probably know more about this than I do, but I think like Minneapolis, does Minneapolis have curbside pickup of
Yes, they do.
Organics? I mean, we don't even have that in
Recycling
St.
and
Paul.
organics recycling. Yes, they do. But if people don't know how to properly recycle and people don't know what to do, then how is it gonna get there? Because what they'll do is they'll give you a ticket if you put the wrong things in the recycling bin, or if you don't bag up your organics right. What they're making money because you don't know what you're doing. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like a lose-lose situation because nobody's doing it properly, and they're not actually making people do it. You know, so it's all over the place.
Looking at your book, I think a really great strategy would be to educate, especially kids. But you know, because then they go home and they tell their parents, "Hey, don't throw that away. You can recycle that." I mean, kids are really good about that topic, don't you think? Maybe, I don't know if that's how you're approaching this.
I do.
And that, so it seems like education and outreach to communities is really important at the micro level. So people can learn about how to do it, right?
I don't know where did you go? There you are. Oh, people jump around on the screen when people are leaving, the screen keeps jumping. Anyway, I don't know, you're in North Minneapolis somewhere. I live in St. Paul, and we have another organization that's called Zero Waste St. Paul that is dedicated to educating people about what goes in not only your organic compost, but your other recycling, the the bags that go to the grocery store and the things that go in your cart. And it's, if you want, I can send you the information about it. And, I don't know if there's anything like that in Minneapolis, but if there isn't, you can always hop on ours. Or you can at least take comfort in knowing that there are people around the Twin Cities who are dedicated to education of this, which is, I agree, a prime example. I was just talking to someone today who, didn't know anything about what to do about climate change. And I was telling her what you could do on an individual basis. And things like composting, recycling were top of the list. So,
and then I would just want to add one more thing. Then there's other, or like you said, Carol, there's small organizations that's doing the work. So then the people at the top who make the decisions, why aren't they working with the people that's doing the boots on the ground work that can help and getting this information out and doing it? No, we have to apply for a grant. That's right. So then it's competitive. And so then their friends get it instead of the people that's actually doing the work. So then, what are we supposed to do about that?
I don't know, that you're talking about something that frustrates the majority of the little people at the bottom who are trying to do all our hard work. What are we going to do? I don't have the answers. Okay, we've diminished by about 10 people, 10, 12 people by now. And I think we're running out of questions. If anybody has something else, you go going once.
I thank you so much. I think I'm going to jump off, and thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks for all these really good questions and suggestions and comments. It's really, really terrific. You guys are doing great work, I think.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you so much for coming. We all really appreciated it. And if you want to hear it again, you can go on the Central Minnesota Climate Reality Project website and hear it again. So thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming.